Good evening and welcome back to 31 Horror Nights. It's October 15th and tonight's movie is A Quiet Place Part 2. For those of you who don't know, I watched A Quiet Place Part 1 in the 2019 Horror Nights and I thought it was good. I've seen this exact same concept be used in two other horror movies and it was better than those other two by a pretty wide margin. I've made incorrect assumptions from trailers before, so this might be wrong, but from what it looks like, A Quiet Place Part 2 serves two purposes. The first one is as a sequel. The last movie ended with the family, which had 4 members, then had 5, and then had 4 again, discovering a way to fight the aliens that had wiped out, it seems, a majority of humanity. And with their newfound knowledge, they seem to be going out and trying to help people. But it also seems to serve as a prequel where we actually see this alien invasion, which we never saw in the first movie. It started out well after it. We never saw the initial attack, the initial confusion, most of humanity getting wiped out. But it looks like we're going to see at least some of it here. It's not often you see a horror movie sequel be as well received as this one was, so I'm interested to check it out. Let's see how A Quiet Place 2 stacks up. Hell yeah. That was brilliant. I've said before how I know in my gut when a movie deserves to get a 10 out of 10, and this is a 10 out of 10 kind of movie. It seems that much like The Conjuring, they had something going with the first movie, but it took 2 movies to really perfect it. One thing that was a big part of the first movie was the relationship between the mom and dad of the family. They're given names in the credits, but I swear I didn't hear them say a single name in the first movie, but in this one we did hear their names. They were Lee and Evelyn. And we also learned that the kids are named Regan and Marcus. But if you've seen the first movie, you'd know that Lee dies at the end. So that kind of creates a gap in the cast. But in this movie, Regan steps up, and I would argue that she becomes the main character. This is a great character and a great performance by the actress. Millicent Simmons crushes it. I hope that she has a big future ahead of her. I, as usual, was kind of off the mark with my assessment from the trailer. It's not half prequel, half sequel. The opening scene is like a little flashback to the day of the invasion, and the rest of it is just sequel. And holy crap, did this movie start out with a bang. The opening of A Quiet Place Part 2 is immaculate. The editing, the pacing, the acting, the screenplay, everything came together. Hats off to everybody involved. It also happens to be the only part of the movie where the director, still John Krasinski, makes an appearance on screen because it's before he got killed. But it doesn't just peak at the beginning, everything else is great too. The family has to leave their farmhouse, I assume because the cellar where they kept a lot of their food and supplies got flooded. And with that specific frequency that Regan's hearing aid makes, they now have something to fight back against the aliens. Speaking of which, the aliens don't really look that much better than they did in the first movie. It also, I kind of realized that the design of these aliens is like 5 different other things. Like, they remind me of the Xenomorphs, the Demogorgons, Venom, the Clickers. The only thing that didn't immediately remind me of something else is the way that they move, which is like spiders almost, only with 4 limbs. But the way they look is just nitpicking. They are very effective horror movie monsters. I noticed this in the first movie, but it's especially prevalent here. With the fact that everybody needs to be quiet, the entire movie basically has this very tense atmosphere. They demonstrate that everything can go to hell in one split second, and that threat is looming at any given moment for most scenes. Like, I felt like I had to breathe quieter. My heart was racing. I was like, every 2 seconds I was like, oh, they're gonna knock that over. Ooh, that's going to make a noise. Something's gonna happen. And I've seen so many horror movies that most jump scares don't get me, but one got me in this movie. I don't remember if they did this in the first movie, but in this movie, what they would do occasionally in scenes where Regan is the focus, a lot of times they'll cut off the audio for a few seconds, so you're hearing what she hears, which is nothing. Or, I guess, almost nothing. Apparently, she can hear things a little bit. Aside from the 3 main characters, there's also Emmett, who was an old family friend that you saw in the opening scene. He plays the role of that rough, jaded, there's no hope for anyone during the apocalypse character we've seen a few times. But he does eventually come around and help them. I loved watching these characters figure their way out of these situations, grow as people, become smarter, like find different resources to get out of the jams that they were in. It was a lot like The Conjuring 2 again, where they had the horror and like really good direction of the first movie, and they added to that really good character moments, like really like heartfelt moments. I was grinning ear to ear by the time the movie was over. Sadly, unlike The Conjuring 2, you kind of need to see the first movie to be able to follow this one, but I'd say that the first movie is still pretty good, and I think it's worth it just so that you could watch this movie. I cannot recommend A Quiet Place Part 2 enough. Check it out. Now we'll go into a few spoilers. The family come across Emmett by going to, I think it was like an abandoned factory where he had like set up camp. And I guess he'd set up traps because there was like a tripwire that set off like a bunch of like rattling cans. And there was also a bear trap that the son stepped in. And he was screaming and the mother was desperately trying to calm him down. And I'm just imagining her as like, I did not go through labor in silence just for you to get us killed over a bear trap. Suck it up, young man, or so help me, I will ground you until the end of time. Which would have been hilarious, but kind of unfitting considering the fact that they were in the process of almost dying. But the family doesn't stay together for most of the movie. Around halfway through, Regan splits off because they have a radio and they heard a song coming from it. And the song was leading them to an island with a radio tower. And they got the idea of combining the frequency that heard the aliens with the radio tower to really help people. Regan tries to go at it on her own, but she's not really equipped to do it on her own. So Evelyn asks Emmett to go get her, but instead of coming back when he finds her, he decides to accompany her and help her go to the island. And there's this simple trick in horror movies that is really underutilized. It's when something happens in the beginning that you bring back later. Like a little thing. In the opening scene, Emmett was trying to ask Regan what sign language for dive was. And then later, while the two of them are on a dock getting attacked by a Mad Max feral gang of people, he was able to use that to signal to her to jump into the water. We learned that the aliens can't swim, which does open up a lot of questions about the state of the rest of the world. I mean, you never see the aliens in like a spacecraft or anything. They make it look like they crashed down. So were they just like killing all of mainland America and the rest of the world didn't do anything about it? Maybe I'm overthinking this. But Regan and Emmett find an island. People there are just living their lives. However, just their luck, one of the aliens was on a boat and somehow, maybe the alien drove the boat, I don't know. Somehow, the boat that alien was on washed up on that island and it starts wreaking havoc. Not to mention that while this is happening, the mother and the son and the baby are going through their own thing back on the mainland. I said in the first review that A Quiet Place Part 1 knew how to pace things well. Like, there were, like, long periods of activity and action and tension, but it would take moments to, like, let the audience breathe. That applies here, too, because there was this really long sequence of two scary scenes happening at the same time, and then they took a break, and then they went into the climax of the movie. And eventually Regan is able to hook up her earpiece to the radio tower and broadcast that signal that brings the aliens to their knees. And both her and her brother are able to kill the aliens that are attacking them at that moment. And surprisingly enough, that's where it ends. Like, right at that moment. The family you don't see the family reunite. I guess it's just implied that they do. It was certainly an unexpected choice, but not a bad one. I think I've made it clear that this is the best movie of Horror Nights so far. They took some of the problems in the first movie, fixed them, and then added more awesome things for the sequel. I would highly recommend it. Check it out. It was great. I'll see you guys tomorrow.